Imagine you are sitting around a fire. It is night, and the person sitting next to you, your friend, someone you have known your entire life, suddenly starts talking to someone who is not there, not whispering, talking, full voice, eyes locked on empty darkness, answering questions nobody asked, and everyone around the fire goes quiet. Because this is not the first time. Last week he stopped sleeping. 3 days ago he stopped eating. Yesterday he walked into the woods and screamed at the sky for an hour, and now he is sitting right next to you having a conversation with nothing. What do you do? Do you drive him out? Do you tie him down? Do you pretend it is not happening and hope it stops? Because here is the thing. Ancient humans faced this exact situation over and over again for hundreds of thousands of years, and what they did with it is the opposite of what you think. They did not throw the mentally ill away. In many cases, they made them the most powerful person in the group. Here is a number that changes everything about this conversation. 1%. Schizophrenia affects roughly 1% of every human population ever studied, every culture, every continent, every century. 1 in 100 people. That number has not changed in recorded history, which means it almost certainly has not changed in unrecorded history either. Think about what that means for a band of 50 ancient humans sitting around a fire somewhere on the African savanna. Statistically, one of them was hearing voices the others could not hear, seeing things the others could not see, experiencing a reality that did not match anyone else's, and this was not a one-time problem. This was not a rare event that happened once in a generation. This was every group, every generation, for as long as humans have existed. 1%, always. So the question is not whether ancient humans encountered mental illness. The question is, what did they do about it every single time it happened? And here is where the archaeological record gets interesting. In 1957, archaeologists excavated a cave in northern Iraq called Shanidar. They found a skeleton roughly 45,000 years old. The man had a withered arm. He was missing a hand. He was blind in one eye. By every rule of survival of the fittest, he should have been dead. He was not. The bones showed he had survived for years in this condition. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone decided that this man who could not hunt or gather or fight was still worth keeping alive. Think about that for a second. 45,000 years before anyone wrote down a single word about compassion. Someone practiced it, but here is the question that nobody asks about Shanidar. If they kept the physically disabled alive, what did they do with the ones whose minds broke? Because a person with a broken arm can still be understood, a person with a broken mind. That is something completely different. Here is where the story takes a turn that should make you uncomfortable. Because the answer is not what the modern world taught you to expect. Anthropologists have studied indigenous cultures on every continent, cultures that, until recently, lived in ways that closely resemble how our ancient ancestors survived, and in virtually every single one of them, the person who heard voices, the person who saw visions, the person who disconnected from shared reality was not treated as broken, they were treated as chosen. The voices they heard were not symptoms. They were messages from ancestors, from spirits, from forces that ordinary people could not access. The visions were not hallucinations. They were windows into another world, and the person experiencing them was not a patient, they were a shaman. Now, before you roll your eyes, because I know what you are thinking, that sounds like romanticizing mental illness. It sounds like ancient humans were just too ignorant to understand what was actually happening. Fair? But here is the part that will mess with your head. In 2015, researchers published a study that changed how psychiatrists think about this. They interviewed people experiencing psychosis in 3 different countries: Ghana, Vietnam, and the United States. Same illness, same brain chemistry, same diagnostic criteria, completely different experience. In Ghana and Vietnam, people reported that many of the voices they heard were familiar, sometimes an ancestor, sometimes a guide, sometimes frightening, yes, but not meaningless. In the United States, the voices were almost universally hostile, threatening, random, meaningless, same brain, same illness. But the culture surrounding the person changed what the illness felt like from the inside. Does that sound like the ancient framework was just ignorance? Or does that sound like they accidentally discovered something that modern psychiatry is only now beginning to understand? That meaning changes outcomes, that the story a culture tells about madness changes what madness does to a person. Here is another thing that should bother you. The World Health Organization conducted studies across multiple decades and found that schizophrenia recovery rates were significantly higher in developing countries where communities integrated rather than isolated people with mental illness, than in Western nations with advanced pharmaceutical treatment. Social inclusion consistently produced better outcomes than medication alone. Think about that for a second. A group of ancient humans sitting around a fire, keeping the voices hearing member inside the circle, may have been doing better psychiatry than a hospital with $1 billion research budget. But let me be honest with you about something, because this story is not all beautiful. Ancient humans did not always respond to mental illness with gentle inclusion. Sometimes they responded with a drill. One of the oldest surgical procedures in human history is called trepanation. It is exactly what it sounds like. They drilled a hole in a living person's skull with a stone tool while the person was conscious. We have found these skulls on every inhabited continent, going back over 10,000 years, and many researchers believe at least some of these procedures were performed to release whatever evil spirit was causing the madness. Now that sounds horrifying, and it was, but here is the detail that keeps archaeologists up at night. Many of those skulls show healed bone around the hole, not fresh cuts, healed edges, smooth regrowth that takes weeks or months to form, which means the person survived. Not just survived the surgery, survived the recovery, which means someone stayed. Someone changed whatever passed for a bandage 10,000 years ago. Someone kept infection away. Someone fed the patient while their skull knitted itself back together. Even the most brutal treatment ancient humans attempted still included someone refusing to leave. Does that sound like a species that abandoned its mentally ill? Or does that sound like a species that tried everything it could think of, even the terrifying options? Because doing nothing felt worse? And here is a detail that should genuinely mess with you. Roughly half of all trepanned patients show significant post-surgical bone healing. Medieval psychiatric treatments centuries later killed patients at dramatically higher rates than Stone Age brain surgery. A person with a sharp rock and zero understanding of neuroscience sometimes achieved better survival outcomes than a doctor with a medical degree in the 1700s. Progress in mental health treatment has never moved in one direction, and that is something we do not like to admit. Now, here is something that will genuinely surprise you, because it surprised the scientists who discovered it. Across cultures that have zero contact with each other, Siberia, West Africa, North America, Southeast Asia, the universal treatment for someone experiencing severe mental disturbance was the same: drumming, rhythmic sustained drumming, not symbolic drumming, not let us bang a drum because it sounds spiritual, actual therapeutic drumming that lasted hours. And for a long time, modern researchers looked at this and thought, that is obviously just superstition, just noise dressed up as medicine, and then they actually tested it. Neuroscientists found that synchronized rhythmic drumming measurably reduces cortisol, the stress hormone that floods the brain during psychotic episodes. It induces theta wave states, the same brain states linked to emotional processing and trauma integration. The drum literally retrains the nervous system. And here is the part that should make you stop and think. One of the most effective modern trauma therapies is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It uses bilateral rhythmic stimulation to help the brain process traumatic experience. Bilateral rhythmic stimulation. That is what a shaman with 2 drums was doing 10,000 years ago. Different vocabulary, same mechanism, same neurological result. The ancient healer did not know why it worked, but they knew that it worked because they watched the person come back, not every time, but often enough that the practice survived on every continent independently. When isolated cultures with zero contact arrive at the same solution, the solution is probably working. So here is where this story gets uncomfortable. Because we like to believe that history is a straight line from darkness to light, that we started with ignorance and superstition and gradually built our way toward understanding and compassion, and that is not what happened, not even close. Ancient humans kept the mentally ill inside the circle. They gave them roles. They gave them meaning. They gave them drumming that actually worked on a neurological level they could not have understood. And then civilization arrived, and things got worse. The Greeks had Hippocrates in the 5th century BCE telling everyone that mental illness was a disease of the brain, not the soul. He was right. 2,400 years before the tools existed to prove it, but nobody listened. Instead, the Middle Ages decided madness was demonic possession, and the treatment shifted from care to punishment. People were beaten, starved, chained in darkness, on the theory that making the body unbearable would drive out whatever spirit had taken hold. And then came the institutions. Bethlehem Royal Hospital in London, better known by its nickname, Bedlam, a word that literally entered the English language as a synonym for chaos and madness, because for much of its history, Bedlam charged admission. People paid money to watch the patients as entertainment, as spectacle, as a reminder that whatever they were struggling with, at least they were not that. A Stone Age community kept the suffering person at the fire. A civilized society put them in a cage and sold tickets. Think about that for a second. It took reformers centuries to undo what civilization had done. People whose names should be more famous than they are, who looked at what was being done in the name of treatment and said, no, this person is suffering, and suffering people deserve the same thing that ancient community in Iraq gave to a man with a withered arm 45,000 years ago. Someone who stays. So here is what 300,000 years of evidence actually tells us. The impulse to care for the mentally ill was not invented by modern medicine. It was not invented by religion. It was not invented by philosophy. It was there before all of it, before language, before writing, before anyone had a word for compassion. There was a person whose mind did not work the way everyone else's did, and a community that fed them anyway. That is the oldest medical record we have. Not a text, not a prescription, a healed bone, an adult who should not have survived childhood living into old age because someone decided they mattered. Every framework humans have built since then, shamanism, trepanation, temples, asylums, medication, every single one has been an attempt to answer the same question: what is happening inside this person and how do we help? We have better tools now. We have brain scans and medications and therapies that genuinely save lives. But the data keeps showing us something we do not want to hear, that the single most effective intervention across every culture and every century is also the simplest: do not leave the person alone. The ancient community sitting around a fire that kept the voices hearing member inside the circle was not being naive. They were doing the one thing that actually works: presence. And somewhere in your life right now, there is someone whose mind is taking them somewhere frightening, and they are wondering if anyone notices. They are wondering if anyone will stay. The question is not whether we are more advanced than our ancient ancestors. The question is whether we are willing to do the same thing they did, make space at the fire, and refuse to let the suffering person disappear. If this changed how you think about mental illness, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one.